Welcome to our 2025 Nova Conference on Cultivating Connections, a Path to Transformation. We love these opportunities to connect with old friends and to build new relationships, and we're so delighted to welcome everybody. And we invite you all to put your cameras on, if you can, to promote that sense of community. I'm Susan Prescott, Director of the Nova Centre for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing and Professor of Planetary Health at the University of Western Australia, and it's my pleasure to be leading the Nova Network and to be chairing the conference. And we start with our universal acknowledgement to celebrate all people, places and our planet. We acknowledge all wisdom, past, present and emerging, and the spirit of the earth and the spirit of community that sustains us all with great gratitude, love and respect. Thank you. We hope that you've been enjoying our campfire events throughout the year, and this conference is a wonderful way to end the year with more specific focus on the importance of connectivity and relationship for transformation and healing of personal, local and global challenges. And that is the message of our 2-minute conference theme, which we will play right now to set the scene. Thank you very much. Well, thank you. None of this would be possible without the vision and the support of the Nova Institute. And I would like to invite our President of Nova, Brian Berman, to add a few words of welcome. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome, everyone. Wonderful to be with you today. I'm Brian Berman. I'm President Founder of the Nova Institute for Health. And for those of you who may be joining us for the very first time, we're so glad that you're here. The Nova Institute, it's a heart-centered think tank that takes action for the good of people, places, and the planet. And our mission is to catalyze new ideas in health and explore the complex network of factors influencing health and flourishing. This conference, it's one of my favorite annual traditions. It's an opportunity to gather, to reflect, to listen, to learn, and imagine new possibilities together. Today's theme of connection and transformation couldn't be more timely. And when I think back to my studies of traditional Chinese medicine, I'm reminded just how much of human experience ties to the fundamental concepts of flow and alignment. These ancient insights echo what neuroscience, behavioral medicine, and other fields of study are now revealing, that our physical, emotional, social, and ecological systems are deeply interwoven. And it follows then that most of our pressing societal challenges stem from fragmentation, isolation, and division. Solutions will not emerge from siloed approaches or any one point of view. From our earliest days, Nova's found joy in connecting the dots, intentionally weaving together diverse disciplines, perspectives, and cultures so that new insights might emerge. We embrace the arts, creativity, nutrition, nature, nurture, mindfulness, and so much more as we examine health and well-being through many intersecting lenses. And this includes our newly established Center for Planetary Consciousness and Global Flourishing, led by Susan, whose innovative work to support communities around the world ties in beautifully with today's program. And I take heart knowing that even in times of profound transition, we have remarkable opportunities ahead of us. There's never been a better time to co-create a new paradigm for health, one rooted in equity, compassion, and a healthier future for all. And this conference is a chance to pursue big questions, challenge outdated assumptions, and spark collaborations that will ripple outward in exciting new directions. So I invite you, bring your full selves into this space today to explore, engage, and above all, have fun. Thank you again for joining us and for being a part of the NOVA community. Thanks also to our extraordinary speakers for graciously sharing your time and wisdom with us. And finally, a very special thanks to Susan for her extraordinary leadership in organizing and hosting today's event. I'm looking forward to the conversation today. So Susan, back to you.
Thank you so much, Brian. And next, to co-create this wonderful space of connection for our discussions, I'd like to invite Rick Scott to guide us through a brief mindful moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan. So let's begin by finding a comfortable position and just take a moment to relax our bodies and our minds. And if you'd like to turn off your video for the next couple minutes, that would be fine. And bring your attention to the fact that you're breathing, becoming aware of the movement of the breath as it enters your body and as it leaves your body. No need to change your breathing in any way. And if you'd like to, gently close your eyes or allow your gaze to soften. Giving full attention and full care to each in-breath and to each out-breath as they flow one after the other. And as we sit in silence for the next few moments, allowing yourself to be fully present in mind, body, spirit, and centered in love. And when you are ready, return your attention to this space and gently open your eyes. And we invite you to turn on your video to foster that sense of connection. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rick. Now, just to overview our schedule, as with all of our events, we have a series of short talks by panelists with discussion at the end of the panel. So this is open to everyone. Please save up your ideas, questions, comments as we go. I'm going to kick off the panel now with my 6-minute introduction to frame the conference and then introduce our first speaker, the wonderful Charles Eisenstein. Thanks very much. Our focus today is on the value of connectivity and the importance of relationship in transforming our challenges into opportunities. We're living in an age of profound disconnection. This is manifest in many ways across societies and ecosystems. Loneliness and polarization, ecological degradation, broken systems, eroding trust in institutions, and widening inequalities. These social and ecological challenges are often treated in isolation, but they're deeply interrelated and share a common root: fragmentation and the neglect of our essential bonds, of people from one another, of systems from their purpose, and of humanity from the natural world that sustains us. Ultimately, most of our challenges, whether personal, local or global, are relational. Unhealthy relationships with our environment, with one another, and even with ourselves. In this session, we begin our exploration by considering the consequences of this relational crisis and what it would mean to restore connection as a guiding principle for transformation. This recognises connection as more than an abstract concept. It is a measurable determinant of health, resilience, and sustainability. When human relationships are fractured, well-being suffers. When they're strong, they nurture belonging, well-being, and collective purpose. Similarly, when we have strong relationships with nature, we're more likely to respect and protect the ecosystems that sustain us. And when communities are connected, socially, emotionally, and structurally, they become more caring, cohesive, and resilient. There could not be a more important time for overarching frameworks, such as planetary health, to underscore the profound interconnection and interdependence of all things, and the need for whole society approaches that centre well-being in everything we do, from the personal to the planetary scale. But it isn't just about understanding connection intellectually, it's about feeling it. Experiential connection, through empathy, compassion and love, awakens our motivation to care and to act. Emotional connection inspires change, and that change is contagious. And that's also why planetary health is more than an academic field. It is a social movement. It's about shifting consciousness for relational healing and cultivating the awareness, attitudes and actions that support flourishing through a culture of connection, collaboration and care. Restoring meaningful connection needs to be both practical and transformative, reaching across every layer of life, from systems to ourselves. It requires tangible pathways, how we design cities and food systems, how we educate, and how we relate to nature. When health systems integrate social and ecological well-being, when food systems honour reciprocity with the land, and when education cultivates empathy and emotional intelligence, we create the conditions for both people and planet to thrive. Art, music and storytelling are powerful tools for personal and collective reconnection, evoking shared emotion, bridging difference, and expressing our shared humanity. Likewise, time in nature restores balance, reduces stress, and rekindles a sense of belonging, both physical and spiritual, to the living earth. These experiential forms of connection remind us that well-being is relational and that healing begins whenever relationships are renewed. Our early years are especially critical. The emotional and environmental conditions in which we grow deeply influence lifelong health and relational capacity. Secure attachment, caring relationships, nourishing food, and time in nature build empathy, resilience, and trust, the foundation of flourishing societies. Investing in these relational beginnings is therefore an investment in our collective future. To be lasting and meaningful, structural change must reflect inner growth. To truly strengthen the systems and support connection, health, education, food and governance, we must also cultivate the inner capacities that sustain them: empathy, self-awareness, curiosity and compassion. This is the essence of connected consciousness, the recognition that our inner states influence the outer systems that we build. Without this foundation, structural change remains fragile. With it, transformation becomes regenerative and enduring. Such integration calls for a new kind of leadership, grounded not in control, but in coherence. Relational leaders build trust, invite participation, and create the conditions for collective intelligence to emerge. They lead from alignment rather than authority, embodying new ways of being that reflect the transformation they hope to inspire. Reconnection is both an outer and an inner journey. It calls us to renew our relationship with nature, with one another, and with ourselves. It reminds us that the vitality of any system, ecological, social, or personal, depends on the quality of its relationships. By working across boundaries, disciplinary, cultural, and spiritual, we begin to repair the fabric of connection that sustains us all. This session invites us to see restoration not as a return to what was lost, but as an evolution toward what is possible, a more conscious, compassionate, and integrated way of living on this planet together. It is now my great pleasure to welcome our wonderful panelists, and I encourage you to explore their bios in the chat link to maximize their time. Each will speak for around 7 or 8 minutes, with the exception of our first speaker, who will speak for 12 to 15 minutes. So now I'm delighted to welcome our first speaker, Charles Eisenstein, renowned author, speaker, and countercultural intellectual, acclaimed for his work creating new narratives for a more beautiful world, with a particular focus on developing more connected consciousness to overcome the destructive stories of separation that are creating so many problems in the world today. There could not be a better person to begin our discussions on restoring connections in a fragmented world. So welcome, Charles. We're so thrilled to have you with us. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Susan. The very generous introduction. And I feel a little bit humbled to be given more time than the others, but I will try to make it worth your while. And I'm just starting right now with my physical experience, which is probably very similar to many of the other people having the physical experience of looking at a screen or a phone or a computer. And at the same time, your mind is telling you that you're actually listening to a human being now. But so much of our bodies are telling us there's no human being here. Like I could look behind my phone, is there a person back there? No one's here. And so here is already a kind of separation that has become so normalized that we hardly ever question it. And hardly ever bring into conscious awareness what is missing. After all, the narrative says that we are becoming more interconnected than ever. But when some part of your brain says this is just pixels on a screen, this is just a speaker sending out sound waves, but there's no human being there, just as if you were watching a movie or an AI-created pseudo-human. It puts us into this kind of sense of unreality, where we question whether we're even here, because our relations now are so mediated through electronic devices. Where when we hear a sound, like say, I thought the music was quite beautiful, but there's no band there. We can't. Our response doesn't feed back into the one that is making the music. Unlike if there's a bird singing outside, I can close the loop by going outside and interacting with the bird. And so this is. I guess I'm just bringing this up to point to the pervasiveness of the field of separation that we have entered as modern human beings, and which we are also here to heal. Our distress at all of these forms of separation, our feeling of wrongness, is a signal that we are here to do something about it. I speak a lot in terms of the story of separation that goes down to a very deep root. I would even call it the mythology of civilization, at least of this civilization, that says that who you are is a separate being in a world of other. That because you're in a world of other, your well-being depends on dominating that other. And because nature is an other to human beings, not an intelligence of itself, then human progress equates to the progressive mastering of nature. And this ideology goes at least back to Descartes. So it's woven into the DNA of civilization. And it promises a utopia of perfect control. When we have mastered all the forces of nature and harnessed them and can control the weather and can control the body and control the genes, control the very molecules and neurotransmitters in our brains, control society, track and surveil every human being, manage everything, then we will have utopia. And that program of control has been underway for a long time, but it has not brought the promised results. So many people now are questioning that whole narrative. And it's not just a narrative, though. I think, Susan, you were saying something about this in your presentation, that it's a state of being, it's a state of embodiment. It's how we think, it's what we allow ourselves to feel. It's the stories that we hold about others. And so you can see all of the different versions of separation playing out in our public discourse, in our politics. Not to get too political here, but my country, the rhetoric at the leadership is all about winning, as if we could separate ourselves from the losers, as if a country that visits violence abroad can escape civil violence or domestic violence, as if the destruction of ecological health won't invade our own bodies, as if we were separate, as if when the whales die or the rainforest dies, or an immigrant is locked in prison, or an indigenous village is uprooted, as if something in ourself doesn't die, as if something in ourself isn't uprooted, as if something in ourself isn't imprisoned. The environmental movement and many social movements they intuitively understand this. Although often their narratives and rhetoric feed back into the story of separation in subtle ways. Because one of the patterns of separation is that you try to find an enemy upon which to blame things, which then becomes the unifying feature of political discourse. Both sides, they disagree on everything except they agree on one thing, which is that the problem is the horrible people on the other side. But when you approach those horrible people with curiosity and compassion, then you don't find a lot of horrible people there. And curiosity then says, what is it like to be you? How did you come to believe what you believe? And when you ask that of somebody else, then you naturally ask that of yourself too. And when both parties are asking that question about each other and about themselves, then they can uncover agreements that they didn't know that they had. and they can uncover questions that neither side had been asking. And so here we see possibilities that are invisible through the lens of conflict, through the lens of separation. If your formula for world saving depends on defeating the bad guys at their own game, you're going to lose. You're going to succumb to despair because you will never be as ruthless as the bad guys. But if you understand that there is something of them in you and something of you in them, and if you hold the possibility of a change of heart and hold the possibility of transformation and the possibility of healing and the possibility of forgiveness, then there is hope. And I'll point out what should be an obvious fact, that all of the problems that we face today are technically easy to solve. They're all artificial human creations. And if they are created by humans, they can be uncreated by humans. So, for example, world hunger. It's not the result of an objective scarcity of food. It's the result of maldistribution. Same with the scarcity of water. Same with the scarcity of touch, of silence, of darkness, of the night sky, of money. All of these forms of scarcity are ultimately the outgrowth of a story of separation. And so, as Susan was saying, the return from that story, really it comes with maybe the completion of that story. But it engages us on every level. The mental level, the emotional level, the embodied level. Somehow in this moment, I want to say that, oh yeah, I wanted to circle back to the environmental movement, recognizing, and this is like the fundamental message of climate change, that doesn't depend actually on the scientific details, but it is the expression of the understanding that what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. Whether it's through greenhouse gases or in some other way. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. What we do as a nation to other nations, we do to ourselves. What we do to other people, we do to ourselves. What we do to other races, we do to ourselves. And that isn't because of some external force that punishes us or rewards us for what we do. That is because the other is not fundamentally separate from the self. And this is something that we can feel when something happens to someone you love or some place you love, or when love expands to meet somebody that maybe you didn't even know. Then what happens to them is happening to you. You can feel it. It's not a self-interested calculation that, if the emperor penguin goes extinct or the blue whale goes extinct. I just heard somewhere that they're not singing their songs anymore. And none of us are making a self-interested calculation that, well, if they stop singing their songs, then this will happen and that'll happen and that'll happen and that'll happen and something bad will happen to my children or something bad will happen to me. No. It hurts because love has expanded ourselves to include what had been seen as other. That's what love is, maybe, the expansion of self to include another. So that what happens to that other is happening to you, the way that you love a child. It's not like if your child is sick that you're making a self-interested calculation that something bad will happen to you. So it's the same for the whales, it's the same for the earth, it's the same for anything that where love breaches our divisions and breaches our judgments and breaches our othering and invites us into the truth. The truth. That we're not separate. And that doesn't mean that you and I are one and there's no distinct individuality, but it means that there's something of you in me and something of me in you. And there's an intimate connection between self and other, that we're woven through each other. And so when the rainforest dies, it doesn't mean that we go extinct. This is actually one of the off-ramps back into separation, that we should take care of the environment, otherwise we'll go extinct. To appeal to fear, to appeal to self-interest. That's not what happens, actually. It's that something in us goes extinct. And as technology and money and other forms of separation have colonized the world, including through the replacement of in-person relationships with electronically mediated ones, including the conversion of nature into commodities and community into services and all the rest. As that has happened, we have become accustomed to a severely impoverished existence where so much of what we are has been cut off, leaving us marooned in these tight, separate selves and desperate to reconnect, desperate to recover our lost beingness, and maybe not knowing how, and maybe being then vulnerable to substitutes for the reconnection, to products, to consumerism, to addiction. And many of us have been through long journeys, seeking the same thing that everybody else seeks ultimately, which is to return. And so I won't take too much more time, but I'll just maybe hopefully set up some other good presentations and conversations. But just to name that underneath all of our different approaches, there is the same desire and the same understanding that if this is not just to return for ourselves to attain some spiritual state, but it is to be an agent of the return of all, because ultimately that's not separate. Spiritual evolution isn't that some people evolve and some don't. That could only be true if we were separate from the ones that don't. But that's not the way it is. So this mission, this purpose that we are born into, to return, to heal, to forgive, to transform the dramas of separation, the dramas of vengeance, the dramas of us versus them, the dramas of the cycles of trauma, the cycles of addiction, the cycles of abuse, all of these dramas that we are here to transform. Which means that, your part in the collective return might look like activism. It might look like something that people celebrate, or it might be very personal. And that you're doing something on behalf of many. Anyway, just to say that each of us charting a different course of return, this is what unites us. And I will say that in those moments of despair where it looks impossible, remember that if it were impossible, you wouldn't be here.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is absolutely beautiful. Thank you for creating the deep foundations for our discussions and encourage us to think about the stories we create about ourselves and the realities and how we can change them, especially if we look at everything through the lens of love, connection, interdependence, and mutualism, as you say. So we're very, very grateful. And this leads beautifully to our next speaker, Moitreyee, whose work embodies community transformation through connectivity with a specific focus on young people and mental health. As founder of Cities Rise, she puts paradigms of inner development for personal and collective well-being into practice through community-led action. So welcome, Moitreyee Sinha. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone. I'm deeply honored to be with you all and delighted to share with you the collaborative efforts of many young leaders, social entrepreneurs, artists, scholars, and researchers from India, Kenya, Colombia, and many other countries who have been working closely together over the last 10 years to see how we bring about a paradigm shift in young people's mental health and well-being. I'd like to start by saying that every young person has the innate capacity within themselves to find who they are, to understand that they're part of something bigger, and to find their own sense of meaning and contribution. And we must support the activation of that innate capacity so that they can work with their unique selves and their unique circumstances to navigate their life journeys and find wholeness and connection. If we look at the state of the world that young people are growing up in, and Susan and Charles mentioned a lot of this already, it's a highly rapidly changing environment, and they're growing up in the midst of inequities, polarization, technology overload, loss of social structures, consumerism, and deep disconnection from nature, their own roots and culture. And we are seeing crisis of mental ill health, anxiety, depression, loneliness, and many other things. And the fundamental issue here is that how do we look at the integrated view of being a human being as part of a connected world? The question that often gets asked is that how do we fix what is broken in young people? That is the wrong question. The question that we should be asking is that how do we activate what is already whole? And the issues that young people are facing is a reflection of the world that we have created around that. And Charles spoke about separation, this immense separation that is growing within us, between us, and with the natural world around us. So what we're really excited is that the centrality of inner development for collective well-being, and what has been happening over the last many years now. And this is actual work on the ground, working with young people in schools, colleges, communities, in these multiple cultures and contexts, that we have distilled 3 strands. What is it that we are learning from modern science? What is it that we can learn from ancient and indigenous wisdom? And what is it that we can learn from the deep experiential learnings from young people and communities themselves? And how do we take all this and simplify into what are the fundamental core capacities that we must urgently come behind to support young people's own development? And these 3 capacities are the capacity for inner cultivation, which is the capacity to turn inward, explore your own inner landscape, and nurture it. The relational capacity, which is the capacity to relate deeply to one's own self, to each other, to the natural world, but also to material world. And the capacity for engaged action, which is how do you take action which is anchored in your own values and your interconnectedness. And where we often trip is that we confuse the inner and the individual. The inner is not individual. The inner is the vastness that connects us over space and time. And this is the physicist in me speaking. But you can think about this as an ocean or a sea. And each of us, we are like a tiny little crest of wave, and we come for 30 years, 80 years, but fundamentally we are deeply interconnected. And when we understand the simultaneousness of the uniqueness of each individual and its oneness with the world, we can then dance with the energy of the universe that is already within us and between us. So what does this mean in terms of practicality? So what we are super excited about is that there is a whole set of actual practices that have now been developed on the ground, along with the different cultural nuances in different countries, places like India, Kenya, Colombia, and others, where these practices are deeply embodied. These fundamentally take a strengths-based approach. All of the things that you were talking about in terms of what activates the transcendent within us, nature, music, arts, service, community, and what makes it highly personalizable for young people. How do they work with their own experience and circumstance? So examples like the temporal lens of gratitude, kindness, and hope, so that they are working with their past, present, and future. So this work is actually happening on the ground in many, many places now. And what is immensely exciting about the possibilities here is that there's a plurality of things and diversity of different ways of doing it. And we can celebrate all that, and while we ensure that there are certain non-negotiables. So any of these practices, and this can, we envision this to be a growing community-generated practices library. But all of these fundamentally then support the development of these core capacities. And also, how do we build the capacities of adults and systems around them? But that means that we must all commit to a certain set of outcomes. So that's really critical here. Things like meaning, belonging, wholeness, which become then the unlocking pathways to the other sets of outcomes we care about, learning, productivity, and other things. And what has now been created as a collaborative effort between partners working in these countries, a back-end technology-enabled measurement and learning, so that it becomes a field-level asset for different social entrepreneurs working on the ground, so that these interventions can become more and more stronger in supporting young people. And how do we also then not create silos so that the underlying scientific and knowledge architecture can develop? And then just one quick example as I wrap up here is that while at the global level, we're looking at what's the language, what are the concepts, what are the measures, here is an example of what's happening in a country like India, where we are looking at how multiple partners can start working together, taking the education system as a critical one, as an example, where what can happen in the classroom, teachers' own well-being, the schools themselves. How do we look at a National Youth Fellowship where we link youth to nature and culture? And how do we take a multi-ecosystem approach in partnership with government, and along with that, build the capacity of professionals and adults? So I'll stop sharing here, but I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to share here, and really excited about the possibility of this ground swelling of collective consciousness. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Moitreyee. Your message about the inner landscape, not as a place of separation and individualism, but our place of deepest connection, is very powerful. And congratulations on this really inspiring and cross-cultural work. Centering more efforts on improving the future of our community and the next generation is really vital for the future, and we hope to continue that theme later in the session. Next, I'm delighted to welcome Byron Johnson from Baylor University, where he is Director of the Institute for Global Human Flourishing, among many other important roles. And he's also a co-director of the Global Flourishing Study, which we've all been following. They published the first tranche of over 70 papers in a collection, including a collection in Nature earlier this year, and of relevance to our theme today. This really showed the importance of community, participation, and especially connections to religious and spiritual communities. Welcome, Byron.
Thank you, Susan. So good to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to Brian for all the great work that you all do at NOVA. If you'll advance to the third slide, we'll get right into it. The Global Flourishing Study is such an ambitious project, and one that Tyler Vanderwill and I have just so enjoyed over the last number of years. These are just some details about the study that help you understand the scope of it. We're following over 200,000 people in 22 countries, close to 40 different languages, representing about 64% of the Earth's population. The special thing about this is that we're following the same people. Nothing quite like this has ever happened before. It's difficult to do panel studies in a country, let alone do them in this many different countries at the same time. So you couldn't do it without a big team. We have about 50 scholars that work on the team between Baylor and Harvard and other places. If you'll advance the slide, you'll see a little bit about the partnership. So it's a partnership between Harvard University, the Human Flourishing Program, and Baylor University. Gallup is doing all the field work, and they've been an incredible partner. We've worked with them for many years. So this project was a natural one for us to do with Gallup. And then the Center for Open Science. So if you could advance it to the next slide. Here you'll see a number of the documents that we have produced. These are not papers. These are actually documents about the study, and these are all available to you. I'll give you a website at the end where you could read about how did we come up with the questionnaire. And it didn't happen overnight. We had input from scholars all around the world. And then there's the co-book, the methodology. And then this is one of our latest products. I hope you can see this. This is the book on translation. It's 1,000 pages. Because when you're doing something like this, translation becomes such a huge deal. How do you do it and do it well? So we thought, let's just put it all together. And this is all available through the Open Science Framework, which is another reason that the study is so special. The data are available to anyone across the world. And people get the data at the same time that we do. We don't get an advanced look at the data. So this too, I think, is the wave of the future in terms of transparency with data. So if you'll advance the slide, I'll try to go as quick as I can. You can advance it again. This is the event that Susan mentioned that we held in Washington, D.C. to release the first group of papers from Wave 1. And now we released 36 papers that day and another 40 since then, with about another 15 to go, I believe, before the end of the year. So roughly 100 papers from Wave 1. We're now writing papers from Wave 2 of the study, even as we complete data collection in the next week on Wave 3. So for those of you that have had a chance to look at the data, you'll have access to Wave 3 data in about 3 months or so, we hope. If you could advance the slide to the next one. And you can, skip through these next 3. These are just showing you some of the outlets that we've been so pleased to have. This is the flagship paper that was in Nature Mental Health, but you can kind of keep going. It's been a great collaboration with the Nature family portfolio of journals, and keep advancing. We'll just kind of and here too, these are just some of the papers. The idea of writing papers on purpose and meaning and mastery, marriage, balance, social support. A lot of these, as Susan mentioned, at the heart of them, you'll find the issue of connection and close relationships, which is one of the key domains of flourishing. Please fast forward through these next couple of slides. This just gives you a taste of the kinds of papers. You can advance it yet again and even again. Go to the next one. Then, so you'll see that the study itself covers so many different topics. Yes, it covers the domains of human flourishing, but we ask a number of questions beyond those domains too. And a lot of people want to know, where does the country that they live in rank? Of course, we don't have all the countries of the world. We hope to at some point. But this is the results. If you just look at the composite flourishing, and Indonesia comes out on top. We like to downplay this because the first thing people want to know is who came in last, who came in first. And so we think the findings are much more nuanced than that. We think that everybody can learn from other countries. We've always approached this project with a sense of humility. We don't think we have figured out human flourishing, but we want to. And so we feel like we're all on a journey toward flourishing. And so this is just wave one data. And as you see, the United States, for example, and Sweden, right in the middle of the pack. And if you go to the next slide, I'll give you just some of the high findings that we're seeing. A lot of these, as Susan said, deal with close relationships. So we ask questions about your childhood and the relationship that you have with your parents. And you can see that that has a lot to do with flourishing as well. I'm trying to watch my watch here as I talk so I don't go over. And you see that lower flourishing is also at some level related to relationships. If you were raised in a home where you felt like you were an outsider because you really didn't have relationships, or you were in a home where you didn't have parents around, this also affects it. You can advance to the next slide. One of the key findings is that young people all around the world are not doing very well. This is running a bit contrary to what we previously learned in the literature about young people doing better and older people doing better, people in the middle age range not doing as well, a U-shaped curve that now seems to be flattening out. So this is cause for concern as we move forward. What do we do about this? And in the next slide, I believe we have this, or was it in the previous slide? Yeah, this slide right here shows that the developed world, maybe we're doing well in financial security, but not so well in terms of good relationships or meaning and purpose and character and virtue. So here again, I think countries that are in the developing world have a lot to teach those of us in the developed world that aren't doing so good on those key markers. And then the last slide that I was going to put up with key findings, religion. Religion seems to be important all across the world. This is one of the few universal findings that we're trying to unpack. And you could argue at the core of religion being so important may well be the relationships that are fostered in these communities of faith. This is something that Robert Putnam talks a lot about when he's looking at social capital. So we really do want to do more studies investigating these spiritual pathways. And then at the last, I think I'm going to give you some websites that you can go to. We'll go one more slide to the websites. Here's where you can find more information on the Global Flourishing Study. Also, I can put in the chat a link to the Nature collection so you can actually see the papers for yourself. And I think I've gone over, Susan, so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well, thank you, Byron. That is absolutely wonderful. Congratulations on the success of this incredible global project. It really reinforces the global need for cultural change and investing in a recalibration that gives greater value to meaning, purpose, relationships and spirituality for human flourishing, perhaps over purely financial goals. And that will also mean stronger connections to the living earth. So we ensure flourishing not only of humans, but also of the natural systems on which we depend. And that need for cultural change towards mutualism is a great lead into our next speaker. It's my great pleasure to welcome Gábor Soós, Secretary General of the Hungarian National Commission for UNESCO. His work centres on building bridges for cultural change and connecting communities for more ethical, participatory, place-based intelligences that honour natural systems and wisdom traditions. Welcome, Gábor.
Thank you very much, Susan, and thank you for the invitation. I would like to begin with two mottos, one from Péter Eszterházy, the Hungarian writer, who liked to quote from Salinger quoting Sappho, "Raise the roof higher, carpenters." A reminder that every generation is called to build a roof higher than the one inherited. And the other is from Sándor Vörös, building on Asian wisdom, "The sky above you, the earth beneath you, but the ladder is within you." These two lines together express everything I want to share with you today, that the world around us is changing faster than ever, and that the way upward, the way forward, is already inside us, waiting to be unfolded in community. Let me start with a personal beginning. I have my birthday today, and I am, as my 20-year-old son who told me some while ago, I'm a boomer. And 15 months ago, my son looked at me and he said, "Daddy, try ChatGPT." I resisted, of course, as any boomer would. But the moment I did try it, something shifted gradually. I realized that we are not simply facing a technological innovation, but the emergence of a new cognitive ecosystem, a world in which humans and machines may co-think, co-create, and increasingly co-evolve. Very quickly, I saw that our classical categories were not enough. We need a deeper framework, one that could help us understand how people, meaning, culture, and memory, and now new digital intelligences interact and shape each other. This was the beginning of an experimental thought process that led me to two innovations. One is an acronym TOLMA, and the other is Polis-SAY. Of the latter, I will talk maybe in the Q&A. But the acronym TOLMA stands for Topo, Logos, Materia, a method for seeing the world through place, meaning, and materiality. And then became the extended version, Chronotolma, a toposophical intelligence field, integrating time, memory, place, knowledge, and embodiment. Well, why does this Chronotolma matters for health and perhaps for the Nova Institute? It begins from the simplest truth, topos, that is place. Health occurs everywhere, somewhere, not in the abstract, but in neighborhoods, in ecosystems, in families, in rituals of care, in the lived reality of communities. The second word, logos, that is meaning. Every health system is also a meaning system. What counts as illness, care, healing, dignity, trust, or belonging, all this is cultural, symbolic, and narrative. And the third aspect, material or materiality. Infrastructure, bodies, water, pharmaceuticals, digital networks, and the planetary limits within which all health occur. When these layers interact, place, meaning, and materiality, they form a field, an intelligence field. And this is why Chronotolma resonates so strongly with health, because health itself is not linear. It is itself a field phenomenon, a tapestry of relationships, biological, social, ecological, digital, and yes, as Byron said, spiritual. Health is not a sector. It is a relational condition. And in the age of AI, these relationships now include non-human intelligences. Maybe intelligence, we don't know what it is, but let's call it some kind of digital intelligence that can shape triage, diagnosis, prediction, communication, access, bias, etc. As I began applying this Chronotolma in practice, mainly in the cultural field, another surprising insight emerged, that this framework grows best outside traditional power centers. You know, as a Hungarian, as a European, I tested it with my European colleagues. There was some resistance. But most of the transformative work over the past 15 months happened not in Paris, where I am now, or in Geneva, but in Paraguay and Kenya, and in communities in Hungary rooted in heritage and ecology. And more work is planned in India, Pakistan, and China. What emerged was not a hierarchy, not a pipeline, but a mycelium network, horizontal, rhizomatic, and alive. I learned that the global south, or rather the majority world, holds not only the demographic center of humanity now, but it also complements at least our Western epistemology by bringing new epistemic centers for diversity, centers of lived knowledge, of ancestral memory, of diverse cultural intelligence, of ecological wisdom, and of resilience under pressure, as Moitreyee Sinha reminded us too. Our common questions are not how can we use AI more efficiently? Technicians can do that, but how do we use AI without losing our humanity? How do we protect our stories, our narratives? How do we preserve dignity in a digital world? And these are, in fact, the questions that on another level, Solzhenitsyn asked in 1999, as my friend present here, Daniel, reminded me about half a year ago. Solzhenitsyn, when asked about the future of humanity, and then it was not yet AI, it was just computers, he said the main question is how we ensure that humans remain the subjects and agents of history. I think that question is very pertinent today. Across many discussions on ethical AI, education, heritage, voter foresight, or peace building, several consistent messages have crystallized, and we have formulated it in the Sophia AI Ethics Manifesto. I would just like to highlight three. One, listening before designing. This is the foundation of both ethical technology and ethical healthcare and data governance. Without deep listening, both systems drift towards harm. And I see this listening as a feminine principle and power in action. The second, the analog first principle, is inspired by Béla Bartók fieldwork 100 years ago. The Bartók 3.0 methodology reminds us that digital tools must be grounded in analog experience, and they should not replace it. And the third, co-creation over extraction. Communities are not just data sets. They are co-authors of their own futures in health, education, and culture. And peace and health must now build in the consciousness of both humans and machines. Digital cognition shapes physical health outcomes. If we do not align the values of AI with human dignity, we risk building systems that are efficient, maybe, but inhumane. And last, topology is destiny. Where you live determines your health more than almost anything else. Thus, this chronotoma framework gives us a language to integrate place, culture, and digital governance, perhaps also into health, foresight, and system thinking. So your institute, as I see it, stands at the intersections of system thinking, environmental determinants, digital health, planetary well-being, and human-centered care. Chronotoma speaks directly to this mission. Well, I may skip here because I don't have much time. Let's just say that this is not only theoretical, it's already happening this in the Sophia ecosystem, where ethical AI companions are co-created with youth in Kenya and Hungary. And let me make a modest personal announcement in the sense of responsibility. For nearly 25 years, I have served across UNESCO's missions and in frameworks that seek to build peace in the consciousness of both humans and machines. Encouraged by colleagues and many friends, I have put myself forward as a candidate for the position of the Deputy Director General of UNESCO. My guiding principle is simple: managing diversity and turning multipolarity into a source of peace, inclusion, and shared intelligence. Let me quote just two sentences from UNESCO's constitution. The Constitution of UNESCO reminds us that peace must be built in the minds, and that it no longer refers only to the human mind. It now includes the digital intelligences we are actively co-creating. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for emphasizing the importance of horizontal networks and local efforts. So many diverse cultures echo very similar messages of wisdom, love, belonging, respect, and unity of life. And this emphasizes the need for common threads and shared language. And that is the perfect segue to our next speaker, because music and arts are often a common, or really offer a common language for social connection and systems change. So I'm delighted to introduce my new friend, ACA Allsop. He's an artist, neuroscientist and psychiatrist, and we were recently working together as a bit of a double act on tour with his music and my art at Yale. He's been doing some incredible work on social connection and collective healing, and we'll begin by playing a short 4-minute video that really shows him in action in community, and then he will add some additional words after this. Thank you.
Music, art, health, cultural programs of the National Academy of Sciences, and LabX curated an afternoon where sound became a conduit for connection. Music for the Collective was a collaborative event bringing art, culture, and healing together through the transformative sounds of the Dr. AZA Trio.
Yeah! Back to the top. Every question has an answer. And every answer has this intersection between music and art. Throughout my career, it always felt like two very separate paths. There was me as the scientist, biology major, taking those classes. Then there was me as the musician in jazz studies, doing jazz combo. But those things didn't really integrate for me. And it was actually a big point of tension intrinsically, because I felt like there was a way for this to connect, but there weren't many pathways in my training to do that. And so as I actually became a psychiatrist and got into residency was when I started to really see that there was this really powerful space to bring music and the arts into healing. Everything that we did today was evidence-based. Right? We've done studies in our lab to show that playing music together, playing percussions together, synchronizes heart rhythms, increases parasympathetic activity. That's the part of the body that helps us to rest. The music mindfulness exercise that we did, right, also increases autonomic nervous system activity in a way that promotes healing and promotes rest. There are all these formulas that music in the popular realm use a lot. Like this is a very common one in jazz. It's a 2-5-1. And one of the things we found in our lab, for instance, is that chord progression specifically activates certain neural networks in the brain that are important for social networking. It's important for connecting, the way that people pay attention to certain cues. Yet still we know that social connection is actually vital to our health. It can be as dangerous as smoking cigarettes to be socially isolated. And in mental health, no matter what the diagnosis is, pretty much all symptoms become worse if someone is socially isolated. I've learned that love requires vulnerability, and the scariness that comes with it is a part of that process. It's like there's an element of surrender that we have to partake in order to receive love and in order to give love. And when we can learn to do that, it can really free us up to connect in a deeper way.
Music is not just art and not just science. It is a bridge. It works on the body, the mind, the brain, and the spirit. It fosters individual healing, strengthens community bonds, and even powers social movements. By integrating science and music, we don't just study health, we create it.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that video and allowing me to be able to highlight some of the work that we've been doing in the community. And And I really want to just go a little bit deeper into the science, because I also think that sometimes having the evidence and seeing the graphs in front of us can be another way of intuition. And when we can bring sort of our natural embodied experience with evidence base, we can really make a lot of changes. And a lot of this work is done through the Center for Collective Healing, which is a decentralized research network between Yale, Howard, and a number of different community and academic partners. And we tackle some major challenges like social bias and social stress, couples work, climate and nature relatedness, coordination and problem solving. And we use a number of different approaches, and we'll focus just on music today in my brief comments. Why music? It's really intrinsic to all of our first healing systems across the globe. And it seems to have this universal nature, and everywhere we see it in society, music facilitates social behavior and communication. And so in our lab, we looked at a really ancient form of communication and music making, the drum circle, and asked, how can this actually affect our psyche, and how does it affect our physiology? Why drum circles? Well, it has a historical role in communicating, particularly in social settings. We know that group drumming can be really helpful for stress and promoting connection, fostering communion and relationship. Drumming is a communal experience, and it can have a context for synchronized emotion, and it builds socio-emotional behavior across cultural landscapes. Lastly, we think that there's some sort of behavioral synchrony that can happen. And so we developed this paradigm where people come in, they fill out a number of surveys before and after participating in a drum circle. And while they're in the drum circle, we're measuring, amongst a few other things, heart rate variability. Heart rate variability is a measurement of physiology in the body that can tell us about some of the state the body is in. And it can be high or low, and this sort of can tell us if we're in a fight or flight or rest and digest state. And so the first thing I want to show you is that while people are drumming across the drum circle, you see all these really significant changes in these different markers of heart rate variability as they go through these very particular parts of the drum circle. I'm happy to talk about this in more detail. So there's a big effect here on the heart. When we ask them about their stress and anxiety, again, we see all of these markers increase. Beck's anxiety, subjective units of distress, and state anxiety, while altered states of consciousness and social connection increases. And there is this really positive correlation between how much their state anxiety changes with the amount of change in the heart rate variability. And so we're really interested in how these collective music experiences change our physiology to allow us to not only have less anxiety, but be more connected. So we have a model really to track connection, synchrony, and asynchrony. We know that we can really acutely modulate the autonomic nervous system by using something as ancient as a drum circle. And we can show now that it reduces anxiety and stress while increasing altered states of consciousness. And so we think this really may be an effective community-based treatment for anxiety. And we recently got an NIH grant to explore the feasibility of this type of methodology for treating pain and anxiety in individuals with dementia. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation and to share myself as an artist and physician scientist, and looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much, Azier. It is so important that we integrate these creative modalities into personal and collective well-being with good research that you're doing. It all gives greater value to creativity, spirituality, and connected consciousness. So thank you again for this work. Our next speaker extends conscious approaches to our food systems, and I'm really delighted to welcome Andrew Bovarnick from the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, where he is founder of the Conscious Food Systems Alliance. He's at the cutting edge of thinking on transforming food and agricultural commodity systems through more conscious connections with community and with nature, by integrating, again, this message of inner development for systems change. Welcome, Andrew.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll be really testing your mental agility as we jump from music to food. And I'll be doing a quick, rapid, deep dive tour of the food system which is everything from how food is grown, agriculture, to how it's processed, distributed, lands on your plate. But obviously the main commonality here is that I'll be focusing on the inner to outer change. I recognize that many of you may not work in the food system. Of course, you are all part of the food system as eaters and consumers, but you may not know too much about it. But I don't think that matters too much. And, we agreed to use this as an example because it really is a place where we're trying to land inner work consciousness in order to accelerate outer change and change to the food systems. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and I have just a couple slides. So yeah, so I'm the head of food systems at the UN Development Programme, and I've spent almost 30 years, I suppose, working on technical solutions to nature conservation, food systems, etc. And back in around 2025, I decided that maybe there is an alternative way to try to make change. And so I set up the Conscious Food Systems Alliance, which is, as I said, it's a different approach to how we're trying to contribute to transforming our current food system. So, why did we want to do this? I mean, the first observation is, there's been a lot of progress in our global food systems over the decades in terms of increasing yield, productivity, feeding people, but we still live in a state where the food system has a lot of problems. And I'm sure most of these will sound very familiar to you. And our starting point, my starting point hypothesis is this is because of disconnection which is inherent within the food system. We see it in consumption, we see it in eating disorders, obesity issues, pharma, mental health. These are all manifestations of disconnection with the self. And we see it with practitioners like myself and my colleagues. We have burnout trying to work in this field. So there is disconnection from the self that manifests in the food system. There is disconnection from others. We see it in global value chains. When you go buy a packet of some food or can food in the supermarket, you are not connected to the farmer who's growing that food or how they grow it. And so global value chains have aided to that disconnection. There is so much poverty in farming. It's incredible. Farmers have the highest rate of suicide in the world. It just manifests everywhere in terms of disconnection. We could spend a whole workshop on this, which I won't do. But of course, there's also disconnection from nature. And as we know, the food system is actually the main driver of environmental damage in the world. It's the main driver of biodiversity loss, deforestation, 30% of climate change, gas contributions. So there are many problems in the food systems to fix. And we are hypothesizing that the absolute root of all of these problems is disconnection and our own personal societal values towards the food system. So what we believe we need is real innovation, not just technological innovation, which is often focused on, or technical innovation, but innovation on how we actually address this issue of disconnection in the food system. We've learned that knowledge alone is not enough to activate this behavior change and value change. We need to engage with the hearts and minds of those involved in the food system. And as we've been hearing as well in this conference, there is growing science that actually engaging with emotions and values and identities can be effective means for transformation. So with that, these sort of basic assumptions, we believe that we need to bring this type of innovation around connectivity into food systems and the way we support food systems. Particularly, I'm very interested to see how we can land these new approaches or approaches to connection and consciousness into the institutions and governance systems for food systems, and how we bring compassion, care, mindfulness, spirituality, all of these terms that we couch under the umbrella of consciousness into the way decisions are made regarding food systems, from farming decisions to policy decisions to what people cook, to what people buy, to the way we eat. It can fundamentally change the way our global food systems work. And so what we are sort of formalizing here is, and claiming, is that consciousness is a real lever of systems change. And we're trying to bring this into sort of the technical field and the practitioner field of how support is provided in the food system. So because of that, we have created the Conscious Food Systems Alliance. It is a fast-growing global movement to try to formalize and bring all of this thinking into the food system. We now have almost 600 members, individual members, plus organizational partners. And we're really focused on trying to strengthen inner capacities to bring more consciousness into decision-making. We have various different, we're not, we're sort of inner change agnostic. We try to support capacities across all different types of inner work. Again, that's why we've used the word consciousness. So there is mindfulness. We have practices around connection to the land, nature connection, nonviolent communication, compassion. We're not creating any new inner practices, but really where we're trying to innovate is how we can help bring these inner practices to our community members and to farmers, etc. And actually, these are the stakeholders that we're focusing on. So farming communities, how do we really help bring and build resilience, mental resilience within farming communities so that they can produce in harmony with nature? Really focusing on policymakers. I'm at the UN, so of course some of our main clients are governments, national, could be down to mayors, because I believe that more conscious policymakers make more conscious policy, which can obviously really strategically direct the way food systems are governed. And then change makers. So all of you, everyone working in food systems, we're really trying to target them, and we're really trying to empower our members of the Alliance to get more involved. We have training programs, we have pilot projects on the ground, etc. There's not much time to go into it, but of course we'll share contacts later for anyone who might be interested. I just want to sort of end with something exciting. So whilst we're growing all of this and we have local hubs and we're really trying to, as I say, expand the community and bring it down to the ground, we do have in 2026 a very exciting milestone for the Alliance and for food systems. We now are co-hosting with the government of Bhutan the world's first global summit on conscious food systems. So this is a real moment, I think, in history to try to elevate all of our intentions and beliefs around the role of consciousness in inner work for outer work. Again, the hook is food systems, but I think it's bigger than that. It's all about environmental, climate movements. And so we're very excited about this. This will be September 1, 2026. We'd love to see all of you there. And we'll be spending a lot of the year preparing this. But we really hope it is a moment in time for inspiration on how and elevating this role of consciousness and how we are trying to contribute to global transformation. We'd love for all of you to join COFSA, be part of the movement. You can write to me or to Susan. We are already collaborating with Susan actually on a journal around this topic, and maybe I will leave it there. I would love to connect with you all and hope this can be useful for all of you. And Susan, maybe you can say something about the journal too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andrew. There is so much important work to do in this space, and we are indeed delighted to be collaborating with your team at COFSA and others on a special issue on agroecology and conscious food systems in the Challenges Journal for Planetary Health. So we'll try and put a link to that in the chat in a moment as well. Our next speaker is going to continue the theme of community, relational and collective wellbeing with a focus on children and families for lifelong health. And I'm delighted to introduce Christy Bethell, who I'm sure many of you already know as one of our Nova Scholars, a professor at Johns Hopkins University. She's going to talk about the importance of investing in early relationships for the future of our societies. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you. It is a tremendous honor to be here again with you, Susan. You continue to amaze me, and I'm humbled to join after everything I just heard. It's such a wonderful emergence that we are coming to consensus about what we already know. We sort of have the science now to support. So I'm going to try to build on that. My focus is on connecting from the start. And I think we've already heard today that relational health, even in the global flourishing study and so forth, really pops up as an explainer of what's going on, even with other similar kinds of adversities. So I'm going to speak to that with a focus on early relational health as a foundation for lifelong flourishing. Let me get my slides moving here. So we are built for nurturing connection. I think the science is really clear about that, but we have myths in our culture that really seem to forget that we consider it to be sort of a luxury good. Like once you have to have your needs met, food, shelter, clothing, and then we can turn our attention to nurturing connection. And I think we also assume that we know what it is and that it exists, but we have core capacities and things that we can build. We're built for it, but we've lived in a culture that hasn't prioritized it or even known its intimate connection with our biology and development and well-being socially. The truth is we survive, I think, we survive and grow through difficulties because of nurturing connection, and that the flourishing, wish I had more time to talk about how I define that, promotes nurturing connection, promoted by nurturing connection, is the source of our capacity to create meaning, resilience, relational care with each other, creativity, and belonging, even amid adversity, that we don't get rid of the bad, but we promote the good, and then maybe we have a chance to create a culture that can actually meaningfully address our social issues and issues of caring for the planet through policy and the choices that we make consciously. So I focus a lot on flourishing of the living and relating self. There's other types of flourishing, of the remembering self, life satisfaction, requiring self, having needs met, and experiencing self. Currently, am I happy? But I'm talking about the living and relating self that goes across time and that is present through different adversities that we experience. And this is a more complicated data slide. You don't have to look at it all. I'll give you the punchline. But basically, we had a chance to look at the whole system, the whole child, looking at social factors. There's a lot of focus on if we can solve economic issues and housing issues and food issues, which are critical, that we won't need to really do anything else and that all children will flourish. So what we found is that even children without any social risks that are evidence-based that I just mentioned, that they are still 2.5 times more likely to have some kind of chronic mental, emotional, behavioral problem or chronic health problem if they have those relational health risks like adverse childhood experiences. And also that it's turning out that this kind of analysis is really saying that even though where you live is important, perhaps culturally, that zip code is not destiny, that the neighborhood where you live in matters, but much less than how you are relationally and supported in the culture that you live in. So we know that child flourishing begins before birth. This is actually not so new news, but it's actually fairly new, just 2020 finally getting at how cortisol can go into the child and impact their brain. And then, of course, we know that attachment and biobehavioral synchrony is critical to healthy brain development. This is a graph that just shows what happens when nurturance is not present and abuse is present in terms of the brain development of a child, which is striking. But reducing adversity is not enough. We need to proactively promote positive nurturance and flourishing as our North Star. That does mean we want to reduce adversity and improve those core skills and capacities that we've been talking about today. But we need to also add proactively the positive relational supports. We did a study looking at flourishing amid adversity. I noticed that across all levels of adverse childhood experiences, poverty, and disability, there was a lot of variation. What's that about? We had created some measures on family resilience, like having hope, feeling you have strengths to draw on, reaching out to each other when things are hard, feeling that you're managing being a parent well, and parent-child connection as an indicator. And basically what we found was that even without any adversities, huge variation in how children are doing in terms of their flourishing based on these family resilience and connection factors. This won't be a surprise. The good news here is it was population-based, so we could use it for policy, which was the main goal. That's my sort of sacred activism, is trying to move toward translating our science into epidemiological studies for population health so that we can start to move it into policy. But only half of the children in the United States were experiencing high levels of family resilience and connection, again, pointing to the broader need that we have. But our evidence-based conclusion was really the absence of the positive is the negative, and even without adversities, that family resilience and connection, what I'm going to talk about next is positive childhood experiences, usually do not flourish. And so we know the absence of illness and adversity is not the same as flourishing. We have created a analogy to the adverse childhood experiences measure, which we've been able to validate, called positive childhood experiences, a cumulative positive indicator that is anchored in the science as well, that really is focused on relationships and relational health. Other types of positive experiences were not really indicated as being very impactful on health outcomes, but the relational pieces were. And we found in one study that a 72% lower odds of adults having depression when, as children, they experienced positive childhood experiences. So this is about experiencing. If you remember back as an adult that you experienced this, then it's been knocking around in your neurobiology and your nervous system and identity all this time. But if you don't recall that, then it really didn't happen for you. So this gets us out of the realm of, objectively finding out whether you think, like if you were a helicopter, that a child had positive childhood experiences versus what actually got in. So the felt experience, again, being very important. But it's a paradox because most of the positive childhood experiences is about how we meet each other when things are hard, how we come together in community, in school, and in the family. And the good news is that we have just released another study looking at the economic savings in the United States by promoting positive childhood experiences. Again, only about a little over half of adults report having had higher positive childhood experiences. And our analysis across 4 states that it was about $216 billion with equivalencies in the hundreds of trillions of dollars on a yearly basis if this is scaled to the nation. So there we are, but we know that scaling the possibilities for flourishing requires relational systems of care. So bringing all this up to the level of community, to systems, is a lot of the work that I do, where we share outcomes and goals and accountabilities across healthcare, education, social services, community. But these are not common. These types of collaborations and their success and sustainability is often not common. So we need to turn our attention to how we create those relational systems of care. I think a lot of people have been speaking about that today. The fortunate thing, I only have a few minutes, so I want to just get to the punchline, is we do have a lot of national recommendations and platforms that are specifically focused on this. So we have a new Launching Lifelong Health report that I was part of with the national academies. The chief aim is to get primary prevention into every community. Denny Fishbein, who's on the call too, called Drinking Water of Every Community, where relationships, financing, data, even digital solutions, and supportive policies are all central, but also doable. So our focus is on this, what we call one big doable thing, where we leverage existing systems, existing performance measures, existing capacities, which we have so many of, but connect them in very specific ways with an anchor toward engaging partnerships with family and community so that children flourish and succeed in school, which we know is a lifelong benefit. So where we need leadership, integrated systems, implementation. So there's things available, but my ending questions are really, what are the implications of the science that we have on healing? which I sort of bucket into time in, time with, time for practices. We have a lot of research looking at the impact on DNA, mitochondria, microglial cells in the brain, all of relating back to early adversity and nurturance. So we have a huge opportunity. I think flourishing is upon us because it's within and between us. And our best science is that we are the medicine. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Christy. This work is so important to our future, and it's really encouraging. There's been so much more public advocacy and political focus on the early years. And that brings us to the importance of education. And our final panellist, Bianca Briciu, is from the School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality at St Paul University. Her work is pivotal in advancing emotional intelligence at the intersection of leadership, spirituality, and human development. And this is really vital for the kind of leaders that we need for more connected, coherent, and caring communities. Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you very much for having me here and for joining me, everyone. It's such an honor to be with you here today. I'm going to speak a little bit about what is this framework of transformative leadership and how do we approach it as a way of educating transformative leaders, because this is one of the difficult aspects of how can you move into that sort of leadership that we can easily define. And in terms of a definition of transformative leadership, we could look at three very important pillars or dimensions of transformative leadership, which is this idea of leadership as a human capacity, that everyone can be a leader in their sphere of influence. It's not about leadership that is in a recognized social role of management or leadership. It's about a leadership that's anchored in social justice and connected consciousness. So it's based on these universal ethical principles and grounded in a form of spirituality, or we can call it connected consciousness. The third very important aspect of transformative leadership is that it recognizes and it intentionally focuses on the interconnectedness between personal transformation and social transformation. And I used here the image of the Mobius strip to reflect on the idea that as we develop leaders, it's about developing whole persons, whole human beings who have the capacity to change their grid of interpreting reality as they live, as they have experiences, as they engage with more and more complex knowledge. So it is about a constant process of development of one's, consciousness, and that also helps leaders be able to hold more complexity, to move into a planetary consciousness, to make decisions based on this deep sense of interconnectedness. And this is what Charles was, leading us into at the beginning with this idea of that expansion of the heart to hold everyone in one's consciousness. And what does that mean? And one of the portals into how we educate transformative leaders in our School for Leadership, Ecology, and Equity is the idea that we live in large systems that reproduce complex trauma. And complex trauma includes collective trauma, personal trauma, and intergenerational trauma into many. This is a framework developed by psychologist Jared Cass that it has effects on four different dimensions of experience, and leaders without going through healing and transformation processes, they reproduce what he calls the chain of pain in the systems that where they make decisions and where they intervene. So it's about how can we engage in a process of recognizing these conditionings that we have based on complex trauma levels, and how can we transform them. And at the first level, we have the biobehavioral impact of trauma, which can lead to aggression, anxiety, numbing, reactivity, or hypervigilance. So this is really at a very personal level, how we show up in the world, how we show up in relationships, whether we are anxious or not, if we are reactive, if we have shut down our emotions. And the way we promote education for transformative leaders, it's really understanding how we can address these reactions. So moving into a collective healing process, basically through transformative learning, using mindfulness, using music, art, listening, and somatic practices in the way we teach our participants. The second level is the cognitive socio-cultural aspect of trauma conditioning, which is the normalization of domination and oppression. That split of the world into those who have power and those who don't, dualistic thinking and an ethos of competition, control, and domination that has become so normalized under capitalism that it's our major worldview. So the way we work through that in our education processes is the cultivation of critical thinking, self-awareness, reflection on action, so that constant reflection on whether our actions have the desired impact, and systems awareness. The social emotional impact or adaptation to complex trauma is the repression. That's the disconnection that many of you have talked about, that disconnection from self and other, from my own heart and another person's heart, that leads to polarization, social fragmentation, and a lot of suffering that manifests both physically and mentally. So the way we address that is through the cultivation of emotional intelligence, trust and empathy, self-compassion and compassion. And the fourth level of trauma conditioning that results from complex trauma is the existential spiritual level, which can lead to a lack of meaning and purpose, a cynical view of the world, a sense of hopelessness and lack of creativity. So in our education processes, we cultivate wonder, insight, unity, meaning, and hope. So if you look at all these different aspects that we try to cultivate in the courses, it's a little bit challenging to introduce all these approaches in an academic field that is dominated by cognitive intelligence, right? So if we look at the definition of the cognitive intelligence, it's about the capacity to learn, reason, solve problems, process information, plan and think abstractly. So cognitive really refers to our capacity to think and process information in an abstract way. And this is the highlight of higher education in general. This is what we develop the most, like critical thinking, problem solving, analytical skills, and logic. Now, embodied or somatic intelligence refers to our capacity to understand and respond and work with the sensations of our bodies, because the body holds our history. So we embody oppressive social conditions, and sustainable transformation happens through the body. So the body holds the memory of trauma in many different cases, and it can continue to reproduce that particular reactivity. So cultivating embodied intelligence is about learning how to move from the flight, fight, freeze, or appease reactions that we have that can remain constant over time to more alignment, freedom, choice, and connection. And emotional intelligence is about recognizing emotions as sources of wisdom, being able to understand how we feel, why we feel a certain way, and constantly, intentionally move towards experiencing positive emotions and cultivating positive emotions in other people. And last, spiritual intelligence. This is a framework that has been quite controversial, but in psychology, there is research that defines spiritual intelligence as a set of 5 abilities, like the transcendence, so having these moments of unity and transcendence with a deeper wisdom or larger wisdom than us, an expansion of consciousness, investing everyday activities and relationships with a sense of the sacred, and that is what leads to deep connections with one another, relying on spiritual resources to solve life problems, and virtuous behavior. So how we behave in the world and how we show up is influencing how we embody these wisdom that comes from transcendence into how we make decisions and how we relate to people. And last, I wanted to connect the vision of education as healing from complex trauma to education for transformative leadership as a way to cultivate the inner world of leaders to a psycho-spiritual level that is able to extend a sense of care and love to the whole planet. And Wilbur uses these two phrases of growing up and waking up. And waking up is about experiencing states of awakening, states of connection, like many of you did in your presentation, showing many examples of how that is possible. And growing up is how do we integrate those beautiful experiences. So if we move from the egocentric type of consciousness through the ethnocentric, which is caring for people similar to us, to world-centric as the care extended to the planet, and the cosmocentric refers to that spiral of consciousness development that is able to integrate duality, hold paradoxes, and to hold more love and compassion for the world. So thank you all very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Bianca, and your work's so important for encouraging more compassionate approaches and holistic worldviews for our future leaders, and showing that everyone has a role to play in this kind of leadership. Thank you again. Now, we are running quite behind, and I take responsibility for that, for not interrupting more. I'm sorry. And we do want to take the time to welcome our 2025 NOVA Media Fellows. So we do have a 10-minute video from our Media Fellows. This is a flagship program to increase public understanding of the connections between the health of people, places and planet. We support journalists to immerse themselves in projects that explore different aspects of community connection and well-being. And our 2025 Media Fellows have each recorded just a 2-minute message to introduce themselves and their plan. They're all accomplished journalists, and you can read more about them at the link in the chat. So we'll play that now and still have hopefully 10 minutes after that for discussion. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Juhi Bhatia. I'm a freelance journalist, editor, and writer based in New York City. And for my NOVA Media Fellowship Project, I plan to look at how we can reimagine and rethink the built environment in order to foster social connection, especially in light of our current loneliness crisis. As I'm sure many of you know, in 2023, the former U.S. Surgeon General declared loneliness to be an epidemic in this country, and it's been an issue across the world. And with this has come a spotlight on the wide range of physical and mental health consequences of loneliness, be it a higher risk of depression, higher risk of stroke, or higher risk of dementia. And as people have looked at the consequences, they have also started to look at some of the solutions. So my project will examine the built environment as a potential solution for loneliness. And the built environment really being all of our human-made physical spaces. So think of parks, other public spaces, our homes, offices, etc. And really that examination of the intersection between architecture, urban planning, and public health. So I plan to look at, for instance, design principles that architects and urban planners are using to try to foster more social connection. What are the case studies showing? What are the success stories? And what are really the limitations and opportunities of this approach? Over the next year, I'll examine many different areas, but a few of them include looking at groups that are especially at risk of loneliness. So such as older people, younger people, and those living in low-income communities. So for example, intergenerational housing. What role could it potentially play in fostering social connection, especially among some of these higher risk groups? I also plan to really dig into the research, since we seem to be at early stages of being able to quantify that link between the built environment and loneliness. What is the data really showing? And finally, I plan to look at how we can reimagine the built environment to help cities tackle multiple crises at once, be it, housing shortages, climate change, as well as loneliness. So I look forward to having this opportunity over the next year and really digging into these issues, and I will report back then. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Will Doig. I'm the executive editor of Reasons to Be Cheerful. We're an online magazine focused exclusively on solutions journalism, which basically means that we report not just on problems, but also on evidence-based solutions to those problems, while applying all the standards and rigor of conventional journalism to the practice. Reasons to be Cheerful is based in New York, which is the loudest city in the country, and that's what our project is about. Living here got us thinking, if public space is a shared sonic environment, how might that sonic environment be affecting us physically, mentally, socially? And it turns out it impacts us quite a lot, but not always in the ways that we might expect. So every moment that we're in public spaces, we're enveloped by sound, right? Sidewalks, parks, airports, train stations, just with our very presence, we're all shaping this environmental soundscape, we're contributing to it, we're absorbing it, and at every moment we're being impacted by it. And in urban areas like New York and many other cities, by many measures, noise is the #2 environmental health stressor, second only to air pollution. It has real and lasting health impacts. It contributes to cardiovascular disease, endocrine disorders, strokes, diabetes, cognitive and mental health issues. And it also affects the health of the planet. During the pandemic, we saw that when shipping traffic virtually disappeared for a moment, scientists were able to study how quieter oceans allowed whales to more effectively communicate. So that's just one example. But noise isn't just a problem, it's also a solution, and that is the focus of our project. A couple of examples. For instance, here in New York, in Penn Station, the train station where I live, it's already very loud in there. But if you listen closely, you might hear birds chirping. And that's because the city added even more noise to Penn Station in the form of recorded bird sounds designed to lead visually impaired travelers to an information kiosk that's designed specifically for them. And in Tokyo, railway stations also have their own unique jingles at each station, which are there to wake up commuters who fall asleep on the train. The idea being that while our sleeping brains might not respond to spoken words, they will learn a jingle well enough to wake up so that they don't miss their stop. And environmental noise can be a sign of a healthy city in deeper ways, too. Think about laughter in playgrounds and choral music wafting out of churches, kids yelling and splashing in the community pool. These are the sounds of human connection and vibrant urban life. So our project has 2 parts. First, Reasons to be Cheerful will publish a series of reported articles aimed at better understanding the dynamics, the challenges, the solutions to urban noise. And second, we're going to create a pop-up in a public space that is a demonstration here in New York City that's designed to increase awareness of these dynamics and health impacts for anybody who might want to experience it. So, noise, it's a public health issue, it's an equity challenge, it's a social dynamic, and it's also an opportunity to better design and manage our cities. If we listen more carefully, and if we design our cities more thoughtfully, then we think we can build environments where our shared soundscapes support the health and well-being of all of us. Thanks, and enjoy the conference.
Hi, I'm Rochelle Sharp. I'm a Nova Media Fellow, and I'm focusing my project on the power of the positive. I've discovered a lot of promising solutions to health problems that harness various elements of positive psychology. I'm just finishing a story about how positive childhood experiences can reduce the impact of trauma. I'm working on another that explores how promoting positive community norms can reduce drug abuse. Yet another will examine lay therapy that promotes positive thinking and how it can reduce mental health problems in disadvantaged communities. All these positive solutions actually underscore the theme of this conference. Social connection is critical for healing. In my story on positive community norms, I'm writing about the transformation of one school in rural Minnesota. One day, the principal was alarmed to discover that 47% of his high school juniors were vaping. He was tempted to take the doors off his school bathrooms, but instead, he contacted a consultant trained in the science of the positive, which focuses on ways to increase positive behavior. The consultant based his work on teens' desire for social connection. He knew teens would stop vaping if they thought it would make them unpopular. He found out that only 24% of the student body was vaping, so he launched a marketing campaign repeating the message, "Most of our students don't vape." The message got plastered everywhere, on signs, on the sides of vans, even on the school football team's jerseys. It was marketing 101, he said. The more you see something, the more you believe it. Now, 4 years later, the school vaping rate has plummeted from 24% to 7%, and other schools have had similar results. I'm continuing to do my reporting and look forward to sharing my stories with you. Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Alejandra Borunda. I'm a reporter on the climate team at NPR. And at NPR, I report on how climate change affects human health and what people are doing to prevent those impacts from climate change. So that means I spend a lot of time thinking about the health risks from heat, wildfire smoke, air pollution from burning fossil fuels, vector-borne diseases, and more. And one of the things that became very clear when I started on this beat was that no one, not the government, not most cities, counties, even academics, are doing a very good job of keeping track of many of those climate-related health impacts. So to me, that meant that a lot of the damage being done by climate change was going underreported, uncounted, and very often unrecognized or invisible, even to the people experiencing it. So in the work I'm doing with NOVA, we're trying to make those invisible damages visible. First off, we're working with epidemiologists to assess the true human toll of heat in the US over the past few years. And using that data through a series of stories, we'll explore those findings and show the humanity of the people experiencing the problems induced by heat. That means focusing on unhoused folks in Los Angeles and people dealing with unpredictable electricity shutoffs in the heat of an Arizona mobile home park in the summer. We really want readers and listeners to recognize themselves and their loved ones in these stories, and to be able to create connections and invite empathy for those who are dealing with challenges that honestly we're all likely to face someday. In other projects, we're going to focus on communities who are trying to find solutions to climate-related health problems. That could be small health clinics doing outreach to their outdoor worker patients about heat during the summer, or people building support communities for people who lived through wildfires, or solutions already in place elsewhere in the world that could help people here in the US adapt too. And I think this is important because I think the first step towards solving any problem is seeing the scope clearly. And the health impacts from climate change aren't yet seen very clearly by many people and policymakers within the US. And we're really hoping to change that with some of the storytelling we do this year with NOVA's support. So thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to talking with all of you about more of these ideas soon. Thanks. Bye.
Well, a huge thanks to all of our media fellows. It's been such an important program for NOVA, and we're really looking forward to how all of your work unfolds. So that does bring us to the very important opportunity for open discussion. And we do really value this. So I know that some people may have to leave because their schedules don't permit to stay, but I do want us to give this an opportunity to unfold organically and allow time for people, all of you who've been waiting to make comment or ask questions. So please feel free to stay a little longer for that. As always, we invite people to put their cameras on, go to gallery view at the top right so that you can see everybody. And we hope that all of our wonderful speakers have really seeded so many diverse perspectives on connection, on community, that has stimulated more ideas in many of you. So we now invite anybody who would like to add. It could be some of the speakers might be inspired by what they've heard, or any of you here may wish to add your thoughts and reflections. So the floor is open. I might begin by asking any of the speakers if they have any additional inspirations or particular ways that we can actually bring our efforts together. There are so many commonalities here, and it seems to be that the strength is going to be in actually connecting communities, networking networks. And I wonder if anybody, any of our speakers has any particular suggestions on how we might do that.
I'd like to say something. Thank you for the invitation. Mostly, I think we're in a good place to push things through in ways that really can enable the community actions we're talking about. I shared a few things, and Denny and I are working on a lot, but there is so much existing evidence across pretty much all the topics here, and even consensus. And some of those have, at least in America, have been translated into recommendations. And of course, how that happens and is sustained is really key. But there was an early relational health study, I mean, it's sort of, we've been circling around it. So I think that I just really want to inspire that we have a lot to move from, to move it into action in local and state and national, at least in the United States. And I think that's true in other countries, because I'm working with at least 26 countries that want translations of measures and flourishing and PCEs and all of it. And so I'm very excited by that movement, but we should grab it. And it does require systems change types of things.
Thank you so much, Christy. Terry, welcome.
Thank you so much. This was a great conference. I'm so happy I was able to watch and listen. Dr. Allsop, I was really inspired by the research you have with the effects of music on our health. I'm in my MPH at Yale, and there are so many times where we have discussion groups on the effects, what we should do to solve some of the issues, and arts and music comes up continually through our group. So it's really promising to see that come out of the same university. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think it is a very natural connector, and there's a lot of power, I think, for things like music, things like mindfulness, psychedelics, which I didn't have a chance to talk about today, to really serve a critical role in just facilitating these processes at multiple levels. So like at the biological level, at the psychological level, at the spiritual level, there are all these mechanisms of action. And so I think as more and more research comes out, I think particularly to the Western modern mind, as more research comes out that provides evidence within a very sort of specific or constrained format, I think it will more and more, convince people that there's something real about these processes and ways of being together.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to say that in listening to everyone, I was reminded of one of the chapters in Gábor Maté's book, The Myth of Normal, the idea that under capitalism, we live an epidemic of disconnection, right? Like the social fabric has fragmented so much, and seeing so many pockets where this reconnection happens is quite hopeful and inspiring. I think one of my questions is, how can we cultivate that deep connection even in the collaborative work? Because sometimes you collaborate with people, but you don't have that nurturing deep connection. You may do work together, but there is something that does not lead to that inner, well-being and flourishing. So that's one of my mysteries, something that I would like to explore more of.
It's so interesting, isn't it? That, we start our conference with a mindful moment. We start some of our other meetings with, at least in Australia, we always have acknowledgement of country. And I think that if we could start any collaboration or moments together with a mindful moment, it may shift perhaps some of these things. So just a thought. George, welcome.
Hi. I also want to address the connectivity arts connection. And I was just really struck by the presentation on music by Dr. Allsop. Music can be done, and art can be done in a solitary basis, or it can be done in a group basis. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the added value that comes from the connectivity in a group process.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And you're right. Music can be done in a solitary way and still have beneficial effects. What we're finding is that there's something particularly interesting about the group process. We've done some research to show, for instance, that you only get activation of certain networks in the brain when you pair music with social interaction. If you just have the music or you just have the social interaction, you don't activate these networks, right? And part of that network is this area of the brain called the somatosensory association cortex, which is responsible for actually how we feel any actual sensation. And so I think there's something really particularly important about the social piece that not only activates these unique networks, but also co-regulates the autonomic nervous system in a different way than if one is by themselves.
Thank you. Gábor?
Very much. Yeah, very quickly. I would just want to suggest a practical idea to do action together, to do concerted action and connect each other. So what if we create, or maybe you already have such a pool of project ideas, simple text, no more than 3-4 pages, from an idea to action, how we connect ideas to action. And it could be a pool somehow tagged where we can look into it and find connection among our initiatives. So for concerted action like music, social art, and that can be implemented on various cultural contexts, various continents. Thank you.
Thank you. And I mean, the work you do is obviously from the high level policy strategies to the grassroots level. I mean, do you see ways of bridging that better in terms of connection? Because, there seems to be parallel conversations going on. We're talking about all the grassroots changes, but then when we look and see the, global leadership, it doesn't seem to be terribly aligned, although there are exceptions, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on that more.
Yes. UNESCO has embarked on a journey about 20 years ago with the Intangible Heritage Convention, where for the first time in the heritage discourse, the concept of communities was enshrined in a convention, that communities are stakeholders even in interstate relations. And that has grown and it has been very important. So you don't only have states to play with, you have all sorts of communities, local, global, interregional, whatever. And I think that gives us a ticket to interconnect communities horizontally across continents on different themes, and to upscale that into interstate, intergovernmental relationships. And this is what the UNESCO Constitution says. Peace built on conventions is not sustainable. Peace has to be founded on the moral, intellectual solidarity of mankind. To achieve that, we have to build a mycelium network across communities, across continents, across diverse epistemologies and cultural diversities.
Thank you. And it is encouraging that this philosophy seems to be penetrating more and more. Moitreyee.
Hi, just a couple of quick comments. One is that I think Bianca was mentioning around, the importance of the inner development capacities within organizations themselves. And one of the things we were finding is that as we were walking in the ground, working with different organizations, working with young people, that how do we actually also support the capacity of organizations to do this type of work? And the role of embodied practices seems to be very central to how we really shift from sort of the more didactic way of training or bringing interventions. And we found that to be very transformative, where it's not just about the work with young people, but how the nonprofits or other groups that are working in the field, that they start shifting their own inner aspects of the organization. The other thing I was wanting to mention is that, I think about music, arts, and culture, we found that to be sort of the universal language among youth in every culture and context. And I think the point around, these superfoods, or the activators of the transcendence, the role of nature, music, but also what happens when it's in a collective format. That is, how do we bring these things in practical ways to more young people? And this notion of how do we keep things linked, I don't know how easy that is. I think we should definitely strive, but in some ways it's exciting that in some ways it's an explosion that's happening in multiple different areas. And I think the type of architecture that needs to get created more intentionally is sort of the local, national, global architecture of how do we link sort of the different, whether it's the knowledge, the innovation ecosystems. But it's exciting to see, these same kind of things coming up in different forum. Thank you.
Thank you. And that will certainly be the continuing discussion in our second session later. Well, not so much later now, but in an hour or so. Are there any pressing questions or comments? If not, I might start to wrap up, but I do want to make sure people have felt, if you do want to say something, please, now's your opportunity. Kate McGee in Australia.
Yes, it's after 1 a.m. here in Australia, but I've really enjoyed listening, and I somehow have managed to stay awake with all these amazing ideas and this wonderful energy. Thank you all. As I've been listening, and even to the discussion that we've had after the speakers, looking at how we start connecting these dots together, and I had just had a meeting earlier this evening with a colleague who was talking about how do we, I'm at a university, and looking at how do we assess, how can we expect to bring about compassionate leaders if we aren't assessing in a compassionate way, and how can we start building our education and our assessments in this I guess, from this pedagogical approach of we are trying to foster more of the energy and the compassion that we want to see transforming. And as Bianca spoke, and Gábor, and all the speakers, I could start to hear different ways of pulling it together. But I'd love to continue those conversations if anyone is interested. Because I know we're out of time at the moment, but I just thought I'd share.
And we surely will this afternoon, or well, soon. And that does come back to changing the story as Charles began the session, and normalizing some of the things that we have all been talking about today. So I think that I will wrap up now, and I do want to thank all of our amazing speakers for their important perspectives and seeding the themes that we will continue, not just in the next session, but on all of our future work and collaboration. So thank you all. Your contributions are greatly appreciated. A key goal of the conference was to connect and collaborate with more communities working towards transformation, be it social, ecological, spiritual. So we do hope that this will inspire new opportunities to magnify this. We have an equally exciting lineup of speakers in our next session who will extend this to look at new paths towards more relational futures. So please join us after that break. If you're new to our community, I do want to let you know that we also have a virtual platform for ongoing dialogue. I'm hoping someone will put the link in the chat, the Nova Integration Hub, and we will post that link so that you can still join and explore there as well. This includes opportunities to create groups and discussions and other events. So now we will have a nearly 2-hour break before our next session. So thank you again for everyone for bringing your energy, your ideas, your enthusiasm for what we are all co-creating together. And we look forward to seeing you again soon for what promises to be another wonderful exploration. So we'll end with a group wave, and thank you very much again. See you soon.